This is the story of Heath Ledger's final apartment and the extraordinary building that housed it. 421 Broome Street in Lower Manhattan has been a government office, a typewriter company, a dust removal business, Andy Warhol's printing operations, and the loft where the Batman actor took his final breath. Over the past 150 years, this single building has quietly witnessed some of the most dramatic chapters in New York City's cultural and real estate history. The building stands in the heart of SoHo on a cobblestone stretch of Broome Street between Lafayette and Center. It is a cast iron structure, 5 stories of rusticated arches, wide glass expanses, and ornate balustrades. Griffith Thomas designed it in 1873, a man the American Institute of Architects once called the most fashionable architect of his generation. Thomas was a contemporary of other legendary New York City architects like Cass Gilbert, who would later design the Woolworth Building. Thomas was prolific. His portfolio included the New York Life Insurance Building, the Arnold Constable Building, and the Gunther Building just a few blocks away on the same street. He built a cavernous ballroom for Caroline Astor, the 19th century socialite known simply as the Mrs. Astor. At 421 Broome Street, Thomas created something that endures to this day. 50 feet of frontage, 111 feet deep, crowned by a central arched pediment that still defines the building's silhouette. For its first several decades, 421 Broome operated purely as commercial space. By 1897, the New York City Board of Education had moved its estimate offices into the building. Over the following century, tenants cycled through one after another. A covered wire manufacturer occupied it, then a typewriter company. Later came a dust removal outfit. At one point, it served as a lumber yard and warehouse. Somewhere in that industrial blur, Andy Warhol reportedly set up printing operations inside, though his famous factory was located elsewhere in Manhattan. The building was a workhorse, absorbing whatever New York needed it to be. But the neighborhood around it was changing. SoHo in the mid-20th century was industrial, neglected, and cheap, which made it a magnet for artists. By the 1960s, the lofts were filling with painters, sculptors, and musicians who could not afford rent anywhere else. Then came the threat that nearly erased all of it. The Lower Manhattan Expressway, a highway project first conceived in the 1930s, would have run directly along Broome Street. Its construction would have demolished what is now SoHo and Little Italy entirely. Hundreds of cast iron buildings would have been gone. Activists led by Jane Jacobs fought it, and preservationist Margot Gale, along with artists and residents, pushed for landmark protections. On August 14, 1973, the SoHo Cast Iron Historic District was officially designated by the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission, shielding roughly 26 blocks and nearly 500 buildings from demolition. 5 years later, the district was listed on the National Register of Historic Places and declared a National Historic Landmark. 421 Broome was safe, but it still had several lives ahead of it. In 2004, the building went residential for the first time in its 131-year history, requiring approvals from the New York City Department of Buildings for the conversion. By 2007, one of its tenants was a 28-year-old Australian actor who had just separated from his longtime girlfriend and Brokeback Mountain co-star Michelle Williams. Heath Ledger moved out of the Brooklyn home he shared with Williams and their daughter Matilda and into a loft at 421 Broome Street, paying $25,000 a month in rent. The space was massive, over 4,400 square feet, with an open floor plan, a great room, 3 bedrooms, 3 baths, and 14-foot ceilings. It was the kind of loft that defines luxury SoHo living, comparable to high-end properties in nearby Tribeca. Here, Ledger threw himself into preparing for the role that would define his legacy. The apartment reportedly filled with DC Comics Joker paraphernalia and recordings of Ledger practicing the voice, the laugh, and the mannerisms for what would become one of the most celebrated Batman villain performances in film history. On January 22, 2008, Heath Ledger was found dead in that apartment from an accidental overdose of prescription medication. He was 28 years old. In the days that followed, fans gathered outside 421 Broome Street to lay flowers, turning the building into an impromptu shrine. Ledger would go on to win a posthumous Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for his portrayal of the Joker in The Dark Knight. The building's next chapter was turbulent. Shortly after Ledger's death, the property entered foreclosure. On July 22, 2009, it sold at auction for $15 million to Donald Burns of Palm Beach Mortgage Management, who was the building's own lender. The property was then converted into condominiums, and 2 additional stories were added, bringing it to its current height. In 2010, the Landmarks Preservation Commission extended the SoHo Cast Iron Historic District, bringing 421 Broome under even stricter preservation rules. Then, in April 2011, distressed securities investor David Matlin and his wife Lisa purchased the building's crown jewel, a triplex penthouse spanning the 5th through 7th floors for $17.08 million. The Matlins transformed it. Working with architect Kirk Lehman and the design firm Roman and Williams, they created something extraordinary. There was over 8,000 square feet of interior space, 4,000 square feet of private outdoor terraces, 6 in total, 15-foot ceilings, 2 kitchens, 2 wood-burning fireplaces, a hot tub, a home gym, Carrara marble bathrooms, more than 20 custom closets. Lisa Matlin personally traveled to Italy to select the marble. The renovation team preserved vintage sprinkler heads attached to the original brick vaulted ceilings, a deliberate nod to the building's industrial past. By all accounts, the Matlins spent more time renovating the apartment than actually living in it. In June 2018, they listed the penthouse for $65 million in the Manhattan luxury real estate market. It was the most expensive listing to hit the market that month. By November, the price had dropped to $59.05 million. It continued to fall, eventually landing at $43.75 million before finally selling in September 2020 for $35.14 million. Making it the most expensive home ever sold in SoHo. The buyer was an anonymous Delaware corporation called Menemshovitz NY Realty. Now here is where the story gets truly wild. Just 1 year later, in November 2021, during the post-COVID Manhattan real estate boom, that same penthouse changed hands again for $49 million in an off-market transaction that eclipsed the previous SoHo record by 40%. That works out to $6,125 per square foot. According to sources familiar with the property, no additional renovations had been done. Someone bought it for $35 million and flipped it for $49 million in roughly 12 months without lifting a hammer, the kind of deal that would later appear in luxury real estate databases like Street Easy. The buyer of the $49 million deal was hidden behind yet another Delaware LLC registered from California by an attorney who specializes in multi-generational wealth transfers for high net worth clients. It was the kind of transaction that happens in silence, brokered by the Alexander brothers at Douglas Elliman, who represented both sides in this off-market deal. Meanwhile, Heath Ledger's old unit, the 4,400 square foot loft where the actor lived and died, had its own quiet coda. It first sold in 2011 for just over $5 million. Then in February 2023, it changed hands again in an off-market deal for $14.03 million to yet another anonymous buyer. Today, 421 Broome Street contains just 4 residential units. The ground floor houses the showroom of designer Thomas O'Brien's Aero Studio, a high-end interior design firm. The building sits in a neighborhood now defined by art galleries, high-end boutiques, and fine dining, a far cry from the industrial landscape that Griffith Thomas designed it for in 1873. What makes 421 Broome Street remarkable is not any single chapter of its story. It is the accumulation. A building designed by New York's most fashionable architect, saved from demolition by activists, used by Warhol, inhabited by one of Hollywood's brightest talents in his final days, foreclosed upon, rebuilt, and then flipped for a $14 million profit in a single year. It has been a government office, a warehouse, a shrine, and the most expensive home in its neighborhood, sometimes all within the span of a single decade. 421 Broome Street does not just reflect New York's history. It is New York's history compressed into 50 feet of cast iron on a cobblestone street in SoHo.